I used to think rebuilding my life meant quitting my job, moving to a new city, starting over from scratch. But one morning, before the coffee, before the emails, I just sat in silence. And I realized, maybe I didn't need a new life. Maybe I needed a new way of living in the one I already had. This is the story of what happened when I stopped running and started choosing differently, right where I was. It didn't start with some grand unraveling, no dramatic ending, no final straw slammed onto a stack of already fragile things. It was more like waking up in a house you built and suddenly noticing that none of the windows opened. Everything I'd spent years constructing looked fine from the outside. A stable job, a reasonably curated life, relationships I could explain to others in a way that made sense. And yet, on a quiet Tuesday morning, I felt it. The dull thud of nothingness, not despair, not burnout. Just the ache of having drifted far from myself without realizing. It wasn't a crisis that knocked me off course. It was the slow accumulation of small abandonments. The way I said yes when I wanted to say no. The way I chose what was impressive over what was true. The way I stayed busy to avoid stillness. For years, I kept upgrading my life without ever asking if it still belonged to me. I thought more meant I was growing. But eventually, all that expansion felt like overreach, stretching so far to meet expectations that I'd left my center behind. And the strange thing is, nothing had to fall apart. My life didn't need burning down. I just needed to stop renovating a house I no longer wanted to live in. What came next wasn't a new beginning. It was something subtler, slower, and far more honest. It was a quiet return to what I'd forgotten to value. A reconstruction, not from rubble, but from within. And it began the moment I stopped chasing reinvention and asked a softer question instead. What if I didn't need to start over? What if I could come home to myself as I am? We live in a world that loves reinvention. Leave it all behind. Burn the old scripts. Cut your hair. Change your city. Build a new identity from scratch. It's glamorous, isn't it? The clean slate. The fresh chapter. The idea that we can shed who we were like an old coat and walk away lighter. But here's what no one tells you. Reinvention can be a beautiful form of avoidance. Sometimes we run from what's unfinished, calling it growth. Sometimes we rename our habits without healing them. I used to envy people who started over boldly, quit their jobs, changed their names, erased entire histories with a confident smile. But when I tried to mimic them, it never felt brave. It felt hollow. I wasn't searching for a new life. I was searching for permission to want something different. And that's not the same thing. The truth was quieter, less cinematic. I didn't want to torch everything. I just wanted to stop editing myself in rooms where I was already invited. I wanted to let the life I had evolve instead of endlessly replacing it. I wasn't broken. I was buried under old roles, outdated definitions of success, tired yeses I no longer believed in. What I needed wasn't reinvention. It was reclamation, a way to gather the parts of me I'd silenced, not to escape, but to reintroduce myself, gently, honestly, without apology. That's when I realized starting over is often just starting again in the same patterns. Rebuilding, on the other hand, means staying present, staying real, and learning how to rearrange the furniture of your life until it fits you again. The first shift wasn't dramatic. I didn't wake up to some thunderous epiphany. It was subtler than that. A quiet moment over coffee where I didn't reach for my phone. A walk where I let silence stay, even when it felt awkward. A calendar invite I paused before accepting. That pause, that tiny hesitation was the beginning. Because before change becomes visible, it becomes a question. A question like, what if I don't owe everyone a yes? What if I don't need to earn rest? What if I could be loyal to my needs without betraying anyone else's? These weren't conclusions. They were seeds. I stopped trying to flip the table and started moving one plate at a time. I said, I don't know, when I didn't. I said, not right now, when it was true. I said nothing at all when silence felt more honest than explanation. And something surprising happened. My life didn't fall apart. It softened. The space I was afraid would be filled with disapproval was filled with breath. The people who mattered didn't leave, and the ones who did had already been drifting. I didn't become a different person. I just stopped performing the version of me I thought would be easiest to love. And when I did, I noticed something I hadn't expected, a kind of peace I didn't have to hustle for. Not happiness exactly, just alignment, a gentle congruence between what I said, what I felt, and how I lived. And once you taste that, you don't go back. The most difficult part wasn't the fear of change. It was the fear of disappointing the version of me that had worked so hard to be acceptable. I had a life that looked right, productive, connected, busy enough to prove I mattered, but not so busy that I looked chaotic. And letting go of that rhythm felt like betrayal, not to others, but to my past self, the one who got me here. But I had to ask, was I living or just maintaining? Was I growing or just defending the structure I'd outgrown? I started declining out of alignment, not rebellion. I stopped measuring my day by output and started noticing how I felt at the end of it. There were awkward moments, conversations where I stumbled, days where the stillness felt like emptiness. But in the cracks, something tender emerged, the beginning of trust. Trust that I didn't need to be hyper-visible to be real, that I didn't need to explain every decision to make it legitimate, that I could choose less and still be whole. People around me noticed too. Some admired it, others questioned it. But the more I lived from quiet clarity, the less I needed to convince anyone else. I wasn't chasing freedom anymore. I was inhabiting it. And freedom, I realized, wasn't loud or flashy. It was warm, subtle. A steady breath in a room that once felt too small. I used to think progress looked like movement. More clients, more calls, more goals hit before Friday. But when I stopped chasing that version, a quiet question surfaced. What if progress is simply becoming more of who I am, not just achieving more of what I planned? That question didn't come with applause. There was no chart to track internal alignment, no badge for learning to pause. But I started noticing something. I wasn't as reactive anymore. Not because life got easier, but because I did. I wasn't waiting for permission to rest. I wasn't filling time to feel worthy. Instead, I started reclaiming micro moments of presence. I lingered over morning tea. I walked slower, on purpose. I wrote things down, not to capture them, but to release them. And over time, that slowness built something surprising: capacity. Not to do more, but to carry things more calmly. Friends noticed I responded instead of reacted. I listened instead of nodded. I didn't have to fix everything to feel useful. I just had to show up fully. That's what rebuilding taught me. It's not about wiping the slate clean. It's about restoring what matters, honoring what works, and letting the rest dissolve with grace, not guilt. It took me too long to learn that boundaries aren't barriers. They're invitations. They say, "This is where I begin. That is where you do." I used to think saying no meant I was closing doors. I didn't want to be difficult. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. So I said yes, until I was saying no to myself without realizing it. Then one day, quietly, I didn't answer a message right away. I finished my lunch without checking email. I didn't stay on the call after the purpose was done. And the world didn't fall apart. In fact, something inside me stopped shaking. Boundaries began as whispers, soft, unsure, but they carried weight. I started writing out my non-negotiables, not rigid rules, but values I could return to. I didn't need everyone to approve. I needed to feel at peace with my decisions. The more I honored that, the more clarity followed. It's not that I became unreachable. I just became more intentional about what I reached for. Boundaries gave my energy shape. They helped me show up more fully where I actually wanted to be. And maybe most importantly, they reminded me, kindness isn't about overextending. It's about being real and still showing up with grace. I used to measure progress the same way the world taught me, through speed, output, visibility. If it didn't look impressive, it didn't feel real. But the truth? The most important changes in my life were invisible to everyone but me. The day I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning. The day I didn't rehearse an apology for taking up space. The day I said, I'm not ready for that, without guilt. Those moments wouldn't earn praise or promotions, but they were milestones. They meant I was becoming someone I could live with, someone I could trust. It's not that I stopped growing. It's that I started growing inward. Deeper roots, gentler mornings, clearer no's. And that's the kind of progress that doesn't scream for attention. It moves quietly, like light shifting across a room, but it changes everything. Now I ask different questions. Did I stay present? Did I honor my energy? Did I speak from truth, not fear? These answers don't show up on charts, but they show up in my peace. They show up in the way I sleep at night, in the way I return to myself after a hard day. That's a kind of success I never saw coming, because no one ever told me it was allowed. I used to believe success was something you chased, fast, loud, public. But that belief left me breathless. I was constantly in motion but never arriving, always proving, never settling, until I realized that maybe success isn't a spotlight, it's a sunrise, quiet, certain, not waiting for permission. Now, success looks like walking away from something I would have once clung to. It looks like saying, I don't need to explain myself to be valid. It's feeling peace in a moment I would have filled with noise. It's writing something only I will read, but knowing it still matters. It's the strength to disappoint others rather than betray myself. It's learning to be proud in private. There's no applause here, no audience, just clarity. And that clarity reshaped my life, not by giving me more, but by showing me what I no longer needed. The frantic urgency, the false urgency, the constant editing of myself to fit someone else's idea of ambition. I gave it back. I walked out of that story and wrote a new one where success sounds like laughter over dinner, like boundaries held without anger, like the quiet knowledge that I didn't abandon myself today. That's the kind of success I live for now. And it turns out, it's enough. Here's the part they don't always tell you. After all the healing, the breakthroughs, the letting go, you often return to the same job, same apartment, same city. Nothing around you may look different, but everything inside does. That's the quiet twist of real transformation. You still show up to Monday meetings, still walk the same grocery aisle, still fold laundry, answer emails, make coffee. But now, you're no longer performing for a life you don't believe in. You're choosing. You say no more often, not out of rebellion, but alignment. You leave space in your calendar, not because you're lazy, but because you finally understand rest is a form of intelligence. You listen more, even when you speak less. You no longer chase urgency, you cultivate rhythm. And the world, confused by your calm, might ask, "What changed?" And you'll smile, quietly, because it wasn't the job, or the city, or the schedule. It was you, your awareness, your boundaries, your voice, your presence. You didn't start over. You simply started showing up as someone you'd lost touch with, yourself. And now, even the smallest moments feel like new territory. A slow walk, a silent dinner, a full breath. That's the revolution, not escape, but return, not reinvention, but reclamation. And it is powerful in ways noise can never touch. If you asked me now, what changed the most? I wouldn't say my job, or my goals, or even my habits. I'd say this: I stopped abandoning myself. I stopped outsourcing my worth to productivity, stopped waiting for permission to rest, and stopped measuring life by how much I could carry without breaking. What I did instead was subtle. I let stillness interrupt me. I let questions linger without racing to answer them. I let discomfort be a teacher instead of a threat. And I learned slowly that peace doesn't scream for attention. It waits. It lives in the way we breathe through a hard day, the way we pause before saying yes, the way we let ourselves feel enough without proving it. This is the essence of the quiet climb. It's not glamorous. It's not viral. It won't win awards. But it is yours. Every boundary reclaimed. Every anxious impulse resisted. Every act of stillness in a world that feeds on noise. You don't need to move across the country. You don't need to quit everything. You don't need a new name or a new wardrobe. You just need to come home to yourself. Again and again. And maybe that's the secret. Rebuilding your life doesn't always look like building something new. Sometimes it looks like sweeping the floor of a space you forgot you loved, sitting down, and staying. Not because it's easy, but because you're ready to live it differently. You don't need a new life. You need a new way of being in the one you already have. The climb isn't about noise, hustle, or escape. It's about quiet alignment, grounded presence, and choosing peace without apology.